Well, a few months ago, Marie and I took a short trip out to Door County, Wisconsin. If you've never been to Door County, Wisconsin, it's a little peninsula that kind of juts out into the northern part of Lake Michigan. And while we were there, we see a few lighthouses, and there was one particular lighthouse that was right next to a active Coast Guard station. And as you would expect, when you look at this active Coast Guard station, it's not designed and laid out for comfort and luxury. It's designed for action. Like the focus is preparation and readiness. And so it's not like you got your fishing boat, like you bring it in and you have it facing toward shore when you dock it. Like they got the boats facing the other way. They're like ready to jump in and go at a moment's notice when they get a call in from a distressed somebody out on the lake. And so they're ready to go. The focus is on preparation and readiness and action, not on comfort and luxury. And seeing that Coast Guard station reminded me of this kind of modern day parable that I came across when I was working my way through seminary. And so I want to share that with you this morning. I want to read it to you. I think it was written maybe back in the 1950s, roughly, but it's meant to serve as a warning for the church today. Okay, and so as you listen to this, I want you to be listening for the warning. What's the warning for the church today? Okay, be listening for that. So here it goes. It says, on a dangerous sea coast where shipwrecks often occur, there was once a crude little life-saving station. The building was just a hut, and there was only one boat. But the few devoted members kept a constant watch over the sea, and with no thought for themselves, they went out day and night, tirelessly searching for those who were lost. Many lives were saved by this wonderful little station, so that it became famous. Some of those who were saved and various others in the surrounding area wanted to become associated with the station and gave of their time and their money and effort for the support of its work. New boats were bought and new crews trained. The little life-saving station grew. Some of the members of the life-saving station were unhappy that the building was so crude and poorly equipped. They felt that a more comfortable place should be provided as the first refuge of those saved from the sea. They replaced the emergency cots with beds and put better furniture in the enlarged building. Now the life-saving station became a popular gathering place for its members, and they decorated it beautifully and furnished it exquisitely because they used it as sort of a club. Fewer members were now interested in going to sea on life-saving missions, so they hired lifeboat crews to do this work. The life-saving motif still prevailed in the club's decorations, and there was a liturgical lifeboat in the room where the club's initiations were held. About this time, a large ship wrecked off the coast, and the hired crews brought in boatloads of cold, wet, and half-drowned people. They were dirty and sick. The beautiful new club was in chaos. So the property committee immediately had a shower house built outside the club where victims of shipwrecks could be cleaned up before coming inside. At the next meeting, there was a split among the club membership. Most of the members wanted to stop the club's life-saving activities as being unpleasant and a hindrance to the normal social life of the club. Some members insisted upon life-saving as their primary purpose and pointed out that they were still called a life-saving station. But they were finally voted down and told if they wanted to save the lives of all the various kinds of people who were shipwrecked in those waters, they could begin their own life-saving station down the coast. And so they did. As the years went by, the new station experienced the same changes that had occurred in the old. It evolved into a club, and yet another life-saving station was founded. History continued to repeat itself. And if you visit that seacoast today, you will find a number of exclusive clubs along that shore. Shipwrecks are frequent in those waters, but most of the people drown. Do you hear the warning in that story for the church today? You hear that. Why do I share that? Why do I bring this up? I share that because even though we live a long way from any seacoast, shipwrecks are still very prevalent in the lives of people all around us. It's all around us. So many people are drowning in life all around us. They're drowning under the weight of a life lived apart from the grace, love, and truth of Jesus Christ. There are shipwrecks all around us. And so I share that story to remind us that the point of the church isn't to be a museum for the healthy. It's to be a hospital for the sick. It's to be a rescue station for those who have made shipwrecks of their lives. As Jesus said, it's not the healthy who need a physician, it's the sick. But the church isn't just to be a hospital that people come to like a typical hospital. It's to be a different kind of hospital. A hospital that takes the healing out to those in need. It takes the rescue out to those who have shipwrecked their lives. And so with all of that in mind, this morning I want to kind of dig into the question, what makes us eager and willing to take bold risks, to put ourselves out there for the sake of helping others find true life in Jesus Christ? To help others find this rescue in Jesus. What keeps us focused on that? What keeps us focused on the good of others instead of drifting into comfort and complacency? And so our passage this morning is going to help us answer that question. And it's going to introduce us to what our focus is going to be for the year ahead. And so let's walk through it. And so our passage focuses on this vision of a prophet named Isaiah. And this vision came to Isaiah at a very important time in the kingdom of Judah's history. So at this point in history, what used to be one nation of Israel under like King David and Solomon has now been split into two. Okay, so you got the kingdom of Israel in the north and the kingdom of Judah in the south. And so they're being led by these kings. And as you might remember, not very many of these kings are good kings. Most of these are bad kings that are leading the people away from God. They're leading them into disobedience to the covenant that God had made with his people after rescuing them from slavery in Egypt. And so most of these kings aren't doing a very good job. They're evil. They're pursuing other gods and other things. So this king Uzziah, though, he was a king of Judah, the southern kingdom, but for most of his life, he was a good king. For most of his life, he was a good king. He sought after God. He started reigning when he was 16 years old. I know for some of you parents of teenagers, that might be a cause for concern, but it was okay. He had help. He had help. He had this guy named Zechariah, who 2 Chronicles 26 says, instructed Uzziah in the fear of God. But then here's what happened. Later in life, he starts to get prideful. He starts to drift. He starts to get prideful. And what he does one day is he enters the temple and he goes to burn incense on the altar. And maybe that doesn't sound like a big deal to you and me, but this was in violation of God's instruction and commands from him. This wasn't his responsibility. It was the responsibility of the priest to do this. And so the priests confront him about this. They challenge him about it, and they say, that's not for you to do. And his response is not humble submission, but anger. He gets angry at them. And in his anger, God strikes him right then and there with leprosy. And they rush him out of the temple, and he's forced to live in isolation and shame with leprosy for the rest of his life. And so his pride leads to his destruction. And so what happened with Uzziah, it was like his view of himself got bigger and bigger and bigger over the course of his life. And anytime our view of ourselves gets bigger and bigger and bigger, you know what happens to our view of God? It gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And that's what happened with Uzziah. And so because of the king's actions, it was like the people needed this reminder of God's incredible holiness, of his otherness, his sovereignty, his glory. And so on the one hand, we love to talk about the nearness of God, how God knows us. He knows every burden in our hearts. He sees every tear that we cry. He's near to us. And that's so incredibly important to understand that aspect of who God is. But we also need to remember that God is infinite. He's infinite. He's far above and beyond us. He's so perfect. It's hard for us to even fathom how perfectly holy he even is. And so along with the nearness of God, there's also this separateness of God, or what we call the holiness of God. And so in that same year that King Uzziah died, God gave this prophet Isaiah this incredible vision of the Lord upon his throne. And so what I want to do is I want to walk through this progression of this vision, and specifically Isaiah's response to this incredible vision. Because in Isaiah's progression through this vision, there's a progression for us that hits our lives as well. And this vision, this progression through this vision is going to prepare our hearts for what we're going to focus on for the entire year ahead of us. And so this vision begins with Isaiah seeing the Lord sitting upon a throne. And so as we read these verses, it seems like some kind of otherworldly description, doesn't it? This seems like some science fiction fantasy story. But Hebrews 9 tells us that these places like the tabernacle, the temple, that these were built at God's instruction to serve as copies of heavenly realities. And so when we see this vision of God on his throne, this is not science fiction. This is ultimate reality. There's nothing truer than this. God on his throne, ruling and reigning over the universe. There's nothing truer than that. But this vision is incredible. It says the Lord is high and lifted up. The train of his robe filled the temple. We have these 6-winged angelic beings called seraphim flying around. And this word seraphim in Hebrew, it means burning ones. So these creatures in and of themselves would have been a sight to behold, let alone the incredible glory of God. But these creatures were created to serve God in perfect obedience, to be active in his very presence. And the seraphim, they call out to God in worship. Because just like us, they were created to worship their Creator. That's why we exist. That's why we're here, to worship our Creator. And so they cry out, holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And so the attention and the focus on the holiness of God, it's like ratcheted up with each repetition of the word holy. And so holiness means like God's moral purity, his separateness from all of his creation. He is the Holy One. And so if you think about this a little bit, this incredible vision of God on his throne, it's this vision, this very image of God himself in all his splendor, in the fullness of his holiness, that Satan saw this and pridefully thought he should be worshiped instead. He thought he should be worshiped instead. And in being cast out of heaven, he then has ever since tried to get us to buy into that same lie. And we do. Ever since Adam and Eve, our fallen nature, our nature, but also every thought, word, and deed we do apart from Christ, we say to ourselves, I should be worshiped. I should get this glory. I should get this attention. I should have this attention and this focus on me. I'm worthy of this. That's the lie we buy into in our sin. And so we too rebel against this very throne, this incredible image of God, our Creator, on the throne. In our sin, we think we're more deserving of this. We think we're more deserving than the holy, holy, holy God who sits on the throne. But Hebrews 12, verses 28 and 29, it says, let us offer to God acceptable worship with reverence and awe, for our God is a consuming fire. This vision that we have here in Isaiah 6, that's why the author of Hebrews calls him a consuming fire. That's why. I mean, the only words I can pull together to describe this vision of God on his throne is that God is an all-consuming fire. His glory and holiness consume us. This is why our sin separates us from God. This is why no degree of sin can stand in the presence of God. And so we're separated from him because of sin. When we lose sight of that, when we lose sight of the glory of God, we become like King Uzziah. We begin to drift into spiritual pride and complacency. And we minimize the sin in us. We get a bigger and bigger view of ourselves and a smaller and smaller view of God. And what happens is we drift into becoming a prideful, complacent church. And a prideful, complacent church is always going to be a dying church. Just like that rescue station I read about. And so look next at Isaiah's response to this scene of God's holiness. Verse 5. Isaiah said, "Woe is me, for I am lost. For I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. For my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts." You see, there's something important we got to remember here. When we are confronted with the holiness of God, the first direction that it takes us isn't outward to tell others about it. That comes later. That comes later. The first direction it takes us when we're confronted with the holiness of God is straight down, face down on the ground. It brings us low. Because often what we love to do is we love to compare ourselves to other people. And so we're like, well, Cousin Joe made a wreck of his life and I'm better than him, so I'm doing okay. But when we recognize that the standard that's required for acceptance into God's presence, it's not Cousin Joe or any other person. It's God himself. It's moral perfection. It's moral holiness. When we understand that, it crushes us. It crushes us because we know we can't compare to that. We can't live up to that in our own strength, in our own merit, in and of ourselves. And so being in the presence of this supremely holy God, it wrecks Isaiah. Different translations have Isaiah saying, "I am doomed. I am undone. I am ruined. I am lost." The point is this vision absolutely wrecks Isaiah because the depths of his sin become so utterly apparent to him when confronted with the moral purity, the perfection, the ultimate righteousness and holiness of God. Even the littlest sin he becomes deeply aware of. And he realizes he has no standing whatsoever in the presence of such a holy God. And so while that word gospel, it means good news, there is always a bad news that comes first that makes the proclamation of the good news such a delight to all who hear it. And we see that bad news right here in Isaiah's response. Because of our sin, we have no standing before God. We can't be in his presence. We're guilty. We're rebels. We're lost. We're ruined. We're doomed. If we're left to ourselves, if we're left to our own good works to try and earn his favor. If we try to attempt it that way, it's going to be like building a ladder to the moon. You can't do it. It ain't going to get you there. It ain't going to work. You're always going to fall short. He's too holy. And even our littlest sins are too much. We're too sinful to earn a place, to earn a right relationship with God. But just when everything seems lost, and it seems like Isaiah is going to be consumed here by the glory of God, he's met with incredible good news instead. Look at verses 6 and 7. It says, "Then one of the seraphim flew to me, having in his hand a burning coal that he had taken with tongs from the altar. And he touched my mouth and said, 'Behold, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away and your sin atoned for.'" What we see here is that the God of all consuming glory is also the God of overwhelming grace. He's met with grace here. Isaiah doesn't deserve this atonement for his sins. He hasn't done a whole bunch of things that warrant him receiving this gift. It's entirely a gift from God, and that's what grace is. And we see here we need to see that there's incredible good news for us too in the truth of the gospel as well. Because here's the thing, John 12, verse 41. John tells us that Isaiah said these things that we read about here in Isaiah's vision. Isaiah said those things because who he saw on the throne was Jesus. Jesus in the fullness of his glory and splendor. Remember when we talked about Philippians, how he's going to return one day and every knee's going to bow, every tongue's going to confess that he is Lord of lords and King of kings? Remember when we dug into that's what we're going to see one day? That's what Isaiah is getting a vision of now, of Jesus on his throne. And we're reminded that it was Jesus, this holy Son of God, who was the sacrifice given for us on the altar of the cross to atone for our sins. It's through Jesus that the grace of God is lavishly poured into our lives. That's what grace stands for. God's riches at Christ's expense. God pours his grace into our lives through Jesus Christ. And so we have this incredible grace of God extend to us through the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. And faith in Jesus is the only way we, sinful us, can be reconciled to such a holy God. Faith in Jesus is the only way we can now have any standing whatsoever to be in God's presence. And just like the glory of God is all-consuming, the grace of God is overwhelming. And so here in these verses is the ultimate act of surrender. Okay, after getting a vision of God's great glory, there's nothing that Isaiah can cling to here. There's nothing he can hold up and say, this is why I should be in your presence, God. Look at what I did here. Look at this thing. Look at these things that I have. Look at these things I did or these possessions I've accumulated. Nothing. He's got to lay it all down. It's only by the grace of God through Jesus Christ that we're not consumed by the all-consuming fire who is God. Here's the thing. It's a deep and a loving grace that God extends to us. It's deep. It's not a kind of, temporary, I'll tolerate you for a little bit kind of grace. It's a you're now my child kind of grace that changes everything. And that kind of grace moves us to turn everything over to God and just say, God, here it is. Use it for your glory. Do what you will with this. That's why we talked about surrender over the entire past year. Why we came back to surrender again and again and again. Everything we talked about last year was to help us see why we need to surrender the fullness of ourselves over to this incredible holy God. And so the incredible God of glory is also an incredible God of grace. And that grace overwhelms us. And it helps us. It moves us to lay everything at Jesus' feet so he can use it for his glory. And so if we surrender everything because we're so overwhelmed by God's glory and grace, then where does that leave us? Where does that bring us to? Where does that take us? Well, it leaves us ready to go. It leaves us ready to go. It stirs in us this desire to just go. That's what we see here with Isaiah in verse 8. It says, and I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send? And who will go for us? And Isaiah boldly declares, here I am. Send me. Use me. I mean, confronted with God's all-consuming glory, we are lost. We are lost. We have no standing before him in and of ourselves. We are truly lost. We're undone. We're unmade. We're doomed. But when the overwhelming grace of God comes to us from such an incredible source of holiness and power and majesty, we go from lost to found. We go from I'm lost to here I am. We go from I surrender all to send me. Use me for your glory. I'll do whatever you want me to do. I'll say whatever you want me to say. I remember experiencing this when I first came to faith just over 20 years ago. God got a hold of me and I wanted to do everything. I wanted to do everything. I signed up for everything. I started helping out with our kids ministry on Wednesday nights at our church. Got involved with our youth ministry on Sunday nights. I got involved with a group of guys that went out and did street evangelism. Started going on mission trips to Juarez, Mexico every year. We started hosting a small group in our house. I just said yes to everything. Now, I'm not recommending that to you. I'm not recommending that you try to do everything. I learned the hard way in those early years that the most important mission field for any and every Christian is first and foremost the family. It's those closest to you. And so I learned that the hard way, and God had to bring conviction into my life and challenge me that I was neglecting things at home. And so I'm not encouraging busyness here. My point is just that, like Isaiah, the grace of God lights a fire in us. And it made me eager to be used by him in some way, to find out, God, how do you want to use me? And now we see from verses 9 through 13 that the mission that God gave to Isaiah was not an easy one. It was definitely not an easy one. God called him to go and declare his truth to a stubborn people who God knew were not going to listen to him. God knew this. Isaiah's mission was to be one of clarity. Okay, God would use him to make clear the hardness of their hearts before he would lead them away into exile in judgment and punishment. Isaiah's calling was a lot different than the calling of Jonah and going to Nineveh. See, when Jonah went to Nineveh, a big revival breaks out. Everybody turns to God. God tells Isaiah basically, don't expect that. This is going to be different. He's not going to see a massive turning to God. He's going to see instead a massive rejection of the truth of God preached through Isaiah. But this was going to serve to clarify the remnant of God's faithful who would remain in that land. And so it was a mission of clarity. And so like Isaiah, God has given us a specific mission to carry out today as his church in this place and in this point in time as well. Jesus has told us, just like he told Isaiah, he's given us this command to go. Go. Jesus told us in what's known as the Great Commission, the end of the Gospel of Matthew, go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. But like Isaiah, we shouldn't expect that our mission is going to be easy either. We're just called to be faithful. Isaiah was just called to be faithful. Leave the results up to God. And that's what we're called to as well. Be faithful, be obedient in what we're called to, and leave the results up to God. And so with all of that in mind, as we behold God's glory, as we're overwhelmed by God's grace, as we eagerly want to be used by God, what is it that we're going to focus on in the year ahead then? Well, if our focus last year was on surrender, laying everything down at the foot of the cross, at the foot of Jesus, then our focus this year is going to be taking up the mission that God has called us to be a part of. Our focus in the year ahead is going to be mission. We're going to spend this entire year fostering hearts that are quick to say, here I am. Send me. Use me. You see, I'm a firm believer in a big sovereign God. God who's in control. And so I know that God has a reason for why he brought Calvary Baptist Church together with Rock Haven Church 5 or 6 years ago. He's a purpose in that. He has a purpose in why our family moved here to Montevideo 4 years ago. He has a purpose in why every single one of you are connected to Rock Haven Church right now in this specific time and point in history. There's a purpose in this. He has a purpose in why he has you living where you live and working where you work. Being neighbors to those who you're neighbors to. He has a purpose for having you in this specific sphere of influence that you're in right now. There's a purpose in that. And that purpose is so that God might draw us ever closer to himself. He might draw us in and he might love us and make himself known to us so that he might transform us and then send us out to help others know the saving truth of Jesus Christ as well. And so part of that reason we can feel so lost and so confused and so hopeless in life, especially through times of suffering, is that we forget why we're here. We forget why we're here. How many truck drivers do we have with us? Anybody drive a semi before? Anybody? Charlie, you have, right? Grain truck? Yeah. I know my dad has. He's out in the back somewhere. I'm guessing if for any of you, if you have before, if you had to right now go out and drive a truck with a trailer through a horrible windstorm with incredible icy conditions, are you going to choose to haul a load, an empty load, or are you going to want a full load through those conditions? You're going to want a full load. Because what's going to happen with an empty load is the trailer is going to get knocked, you're going to get knocked all over the place. But a full load is going to drive straighter. And the reality is that's true with us when it comes to our mission and our purpose in life as well. When we don't have our mission and purpose at the forefront of our lives, we're going to get knocked all over the place. The winds of life are going to take us all over the place. We're going to go into ditches nonstop. But when we have the weight of a mission and the good burden of a responsibility of what God's called us to do, that helps us travel straighter through life. Hard things don't knock us around as much then. And so a firm understanding of our purpose and mission, it helps us to be more resilient in life. And that's why I want you to be firmly rooted in this mission that God has given us. And so in the year ahead, we're going to focus on understanding and being better equipped and engaging in the mission of God that He's called us to be a part of. And so to help us do that, just like last year, we're going to use our preaching ministry to focus on this theme of mission throughout the year. Each sermon series is going to focus on the topic of mission. And so next Sunday, come back and join us next Sunday. We're going to start a sermon series walking through the book of Acts. Probably more so than any other book in the New Testament, the Acts brings together the mission of God and the church's role in it. And so we're going to dig into the book of Acts starting next Sunday. It'll take us all the way through the end of the summer. And then in the fall, to help us be better equipped for our mission, we're going to do a slow walk through the armor of God. Ephesians chapter 6, if you're familiar with that. We're going to slowly walk through each piece to understand how God wants to equip us for this mission that He's called us to. And then towards the end of the year, we're going to do a sermon series called The Mission of God to help us understand what is the work that God is doing in this world. What's He doing in this world, and what is our role in His work? What has He called us to do? And so the big question we're going to keep coming back to over and over again throughout this year to help keep focused on our mission and to help this be personal is this. Who's your one more? Who's your one more? Who's one more person you're willing to commit to pray for, to serve, to love, to invite, to invest in over the year ahead and beyond? Who's one more person you're willing to commit to do that? Who is that? If you had grabbed one of our handouts, write their name on that handout and then put it somewhere where you're going to remember to be praying for them. And you're going to remember to share with them and invite them. Who's your one more? And so let me close by coming back to that question that I asked at the beginning. What is it that's going to make us eager to stay focused as a rescue station for those in need? Well, the answer we find in our passage, it's beholding the all-consuming glory of God and being touched by the overwhelming grace of God. Because when we lose sight of God's glory in the deep ways He's shown us grace through the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, when we lose sight of that thing, inevitably, what begins to follow us and flood into our lives is comfort and complacency. And when comfort and complacency begin to kind of lead the wagon, we start to drift. We start to drift. We start to lose focus on our mission. And so my hope over the year ahead is that we're able to guard against just drifting into becoming a country club for the converted. And that we can stay focused on being a rescue station. Being overwhelmed by God's glory and grace so that we can stay focused on the mission God's called us to. So that we can become people who are so confronted by the glory of God and overwhelmed by the grace of God, that we're willing to say to God, here I am. Send me. Use me wherever you need me, Lord. Send me to that neighbor. Send me to that coworker. Send me to that family member. Send me to that stranger. Use me in their life for your glory, Lord. Wherever you need me, send me, Lord. That's what we're going to focus on in the year ahead.